welcome. At this point, we've got a page with a data grid listing countries, but there's no way at the moment of adding or editing countries in the grid. We've had to enter the data directly into SQL using SQL Management Studio. In this video, we're going to show how this can be accomplished from the data grid. We'll be following the basic pattern described by Alan Simpson in his YouTube videos, but we'll access the functions using Syncfusion. In fact, we'll be using a Syncfusion Custom Toolbar. There is a standard toolbar that Syncfusion has for the data grid, but this uses Entity Framework rather than Dapper, so we won't be able to use that. So the pattern we'll be following is to add a custom toolbar to the Syncfusion data grid. We'll then add the add, edit and delete record functions. And lastly, we'll check that if you're trying to edit or delete a record, that you have actually selected a record from the data grid so that it can be actioned. Right, let's take a look at the code. If you haven't already got Visual Studio open it, and we're going to edit index.razor. The first step is to add the custom toolbar. We'll add the custom toolbar and then add the actions later. So to add a custom toolbar in the SF grid tag, we need to add toolbar equals toolbar items. And we also need to add in the next, separately within the SF grid tags, something to indicate that there's events happening. And I'll copy this from Notepad. And you'll see there's a grid event saying on toolbar click, and then we've given it a name, toolbar click handler. The T value is countries. Next, we have to declare the toolbar items in the C# code. I'll put it under here. So that's just declaring a list of item models called toolbar items as a new list. And then to declare or to specify the actual items in the toolbar, we need to define them here. On the initialize, so when the form opens, it's going to populate the toolbar items with, in this case, add, edit and delete. So for the add, we've got a tooltip of add a new country, and we've given it a prefix icon of the E add. Similarly, we've got edit selected country, and a prefix icon, and delete, a tooltip of delete a selected country. Lastly, in this section, we need to add a procedure to handle the toolbar click handler. And we'll add that as a separate procedure down here. And that should be okay. We've got an error down here, but I think this is just a warning for the moment, because we haven't actually got anything happening here. So the toolbar handler is saying if the item text is add, do something. If it's edit, do something else. And if it's delete, do something else. We'll fill in the code for these sections here. So let's just see if that works and what the effect is. We've now got the countries list with the Syncfusion DataGrid with a custom toolbar at the top that has add, edit, delete, although clicking on any of these items doesn't make any difference at the moment. So we'll go back to our code and make some changes so that we can at least add a record. So I'll stop it. This we're going to be following Alan Simpson's method. So the add function will use a separate page to the index. In fact, the add and the edit will use the same page. So the changes we need to make to this are firstly to add the ability to move to another page, and we'll use the navigation manager for that. So we need to inject the navigation manager. The next step is to declare an integer for the country ID in the code up here. I'll put that at the very top. And what that's for is when we're adding a country, the country ID will be 0, and the add edit page will distinguish between whether we're adding or editing, depending on whether we actually pass an ID to it or whether the ID is 0. And the last thing is we want to put some code in the add section here. So what that's saying is we're setting the country ID to 0, and we're telling the navigation manager to navigate to the country's add edit page, passing to it the parameter of the country ID, which in this case will be 0. Next, we need to create the country's add edit page, and I'll do that by right-clicking on pages, select add, and it'll be a razor component, and we'll call it countries add edit, remembering that razor pages have got to begin with a capital letter. And I've got the code for this here, so I'll copy all this in here and then explain what's happening. So we're using the Blazor countries.data folder for access to those various components. The page is called countries add edit, or the routing is called countries add edit, then with the country ID. So it might be when we're adding, that's going to be 0. We're going to inject the countries service so we can add the record, and the navigation manager so we can get back to the index page. We're going to give it a heading of add a country. I've got 2 here for the moment. Bear with me on that. That will become obvious while I've got that in a minute. We've got an edit form. We're using the model of countries, and on valid submit, it's going to do the countries save. So down here on valid submit, it's going to await the countries service and countries insert, and then it's going to return to the index page. This here will link with the countries service, and it's the insert. So we connecting using the SQL connection, and then we're passing parameters to the stored procedure and then executing the stored procedure. So the rest of the information up here is we've got some buttons either to save or to cancel, and we've got that code that handles that down here. Right, let's see if that will build. And let's run it. So now if I click the Add button, I then go to a separate page where I can add a country. So you'll see up here the actual root is the local host, then countries add edit /0. The zero being we know this is a new country. I can put a country in there. Let's think of one and click Save. We go back to the countries list and there is Belgium sitting at the top. So that all looks good. There's one small change I'm going to make, and that is that when we went to the add a country, we've got the whole width of the page here, and I think it would look neater if we made this a dialog rather than just a simple page. So I'll cancel that. I'll go back to the code. I'll stop it. And what I'm going to do is add in here the SF dialog. And I'm going to make the dialog, it's a Syncfusion control, and I'm going to make it modal, so it'll pop up so the user won't be able to click around, do anything else until either they've saved the country or they've cancelled. The code for this again is pretty straightforward. All we need is this, add it in there, and the end of the dialog here. Now if you run it, and select add, the add a country appears as a dialog box. I can click around here, I can't do anything else. I've got to add a country or cancel. So I'll cancel and I go back to the countries list. I'll close here. And now we must set about adding the code for editing a country. We're going to be using the same page here for editing as well as adding a record. And to do that, we need to make a few changes. First of all, to the index page. The first change we need to make is that we need to add some events in here to detect when a user clicks on the grid to determine which record they have clicked on. So in here we need an event called row selected, and we need to add a row selected handler. So back in the code here, we want to create this new function, which I'll add down here. So what this is doing is when the user clicks on a grid, the row handler is determining which country ID it is, so that we can then pass that to the add edit page so that we can edit that particular country. The next stage is to say that if the country is not 0, we need to go to the countries add edit with the country ID. So let me just copy that code into the here. So what that's saying is that if the country is greater than 0, i.e. they've clicked in a row and we've got the ID, then we need to go to the navigation manager, using the navigation manager, go to countries add edit with that country ID. I'm still troubled by that green warning there. I think that should just probably be a public void. Yes, that's settled that. Right, in countries add edit, we've got some changes to make here as well. First of all, we've got a title here that says add a country. Well, we want to make that so that we can have that as a variable and then determine whether the user is adding or editing and then change the title accordingly. So what we'll do here is give it a page title. So instead of add a country, we'll have a variable page title. We need to declare the page title. And we'll set it as a default to add a country. The next step is when we open the page, we need to determine whether the ID is 0, in which case we'll change the page title to be add a country, or else if it's edit a country, and then we must get the name of the country being passed in, and we'll use the country service countries get one to do that. So let's add that procedure. Where should we put it? We'll put it in here. So that's saying if the country ID is 0, we'll change the page title to add a country. Otherwise, it's edit a country, and then we're going to get the name of the country from the countries service countries get one. The next thing is what happens when we save it. So once we've edited the country and saved it, we'll add this or amend this. So instead of inserting, we'll still need to navigate back. So if the country ID is 0, we'll insert it. Otherwise, we will update it. Right, let's see. I'll save everything, run it. So let's try adding a country. That works. I'm going to edit a country. Notice that United Kingdom I misspelt of all countries, so I can edit that, correct the spelling, and save it. So that looks good. Lastly, we need to add the facility to delete a country. So back to the code, stop it, and we'll now make the changes. To delete a country, we could simply add some code to delete a record in the toolbar click handler event on the index razor page down here. But it would be better practice to warn the user that a record is about to be deleted and to ask the user for confirmation. And we can do this by adding a Syncfusion dialog and then reacting to the user's response. So if we come back up to the grid here, we can add a dialog. And it can be It's a separate section. It's not contained within the SF grid. And what we're saying is it's an SF dialog. Its reference is dialog delete. It's modal. Its width is 250. We're showing the close icon, and by default, it's not visible. We're giving it a header of confirm delete, and then asking the user to confirm that they do want to delete the record. And we've got two buttons, a delete and a cancel. So we've then got two events, confirm delete yes and confirm delete no. We need to declare this dialog. So we can, I'll put it at the top. And then we need to, down here, when we want to delete it, what we want to do is actually show the dialog, which we can do by just inserting this code, saying if you select delete, show the dialog. And lastly, we want this function, or two functions rather. One to say if they confirm or they say they don't want to delete it, delete the record, we just hide the dialog box. If they confirm that they do want to delete it, we call the countries service countries delete and pass into that the ID of the record we're dealing with, and then hide the dialog. We then refresh the grid and say that the state has changed. This will reset everything. So let's see if that works. So there's our grid. Let's choose to delete Belgium. I click delete. Up pops the record that says confirm delete. If I cancel, it won't get deleted. If I say yes, delete, it just disappears. There are, however, a couple of problems with this at this stage. The first is that if the user fails to select a record and clicks edit, for example, nothing happens and the user will be left wondering why that's happening. The other is that we've got nothing in here at the moment to prevent the user adding the same country twice. We'll deal with the not selecting a record now, and we'll deal with the potential of adding duplicate countries in the next video. But for now, let's go back to the code and stop it, and we'll see about preventing or warning the user where they fail to select a record. We'll do this using a Syncfusion Dialog. So if they don't select a record, the dialog will pop up and say, sorry, you have got to select a record or something similar. So the code for that, for the dialog, I can copy and paste in here. So I've created a dialog and I've called it dialog no record selected. It's modal, it's same width as the other one. It's got going to show the close icon, and by default it won't be visible. It's got a header saying warning, and the content is you must select a country. We've got only one button on this case, and it's OK, or they can alternatively just close the dialog. They can click. The only thing they can do is click OK, and that will call a procedure that will close the dialog. We have to declare the dialog as we did down here. So I just copy that. Paste, and this one is dialog record selected. The next thing we need to do is to add some code to trigger the display of the dialog if the user fails to select a record in either edit or delete mode. And that's going to be in the toolbar click handler. So if they've selected a country, that's okay, and the navigation manager will open the country's add edit page. But if not, we want it to display the dialog box warning, giving the warning. The code for this I've got here, so I can just paste that in. So if they select a country, that's fine. If not, the dialog no record selected will show. If they select delete, at the moment we haven't got an if statement in there, so we'll add that, which is, again, I'm just copying and pasting. So if the country ID is more than 0, it will show the dialog delete dialog, otherwise it'll show the no record selected dialog. Now the no record selected dialog, we need a way of closing that. It'll just pop up, there'll be a message, the user will see it and will click OK. The code for that is this separate function. We can put it anywhere in here. Let's stick it there. So all that will do is just close the dialog. Now I've got a problem. Why have I got that? I can see I've got the wrong name. I've just called it close dialog up here, which is a bit generic. Let's call it no record selected. Fine, let's close that. Oh, sorry, save it. See if it works. Fine, now if I don't select a record but immediately click edit, I get a warning, you must select a country, and all I can do is acknowledge that. Or if I try to delete one, again, same warning. So that seems to be working fine. As I say, the next stage is to try and prevent duplicates being added to the countries. We'll tackle that little problem in the next video.